What's up, guys? What are we going to talk about today? Exposure compensation. Alright, when do we use exposure compensation? Well, either when you are shooting in aperture or shutter priority mode. That's when you use exposure compensation. If you are in shutter priority mode, I would highly recommend that you don't use exposure compensation. Just switch it to manual and just try to play with that. Now in aperture, it's very common. A lot of people use it. I personally don't. I just switch it to manual if the pictures are underexposed, overexposed. But if you don't feel comfortable shooting in manual, it's no problem. You can still achieve similar results or very close to what you get in manual if you just adjust your exposure compensation. So, what is really exposure compensation, and when do we use this? When you are in aperture mode and you take a picture, sometimes your picture comes out dark, and sometimes your picture comes out very bright. And this is happening because your light meter is being fooled, like I talked about in my manual video. And it's common, it's very common when you're shooting in aperture. What happens is that if the camera sees something really bright, the camera gets confused. For example, if you were taking a picture of a bride who's dressed in all white, and if you're in aperture mode, the camera sees a lot of white. Well, it doesn't really see white, the camera sees in gray. Camera gets confused, and camera says there's a lot of light, and to compensate for that, camera increases the shutter speed, so there's less light coming in. But in reality, there is not a lot of light, it's just she's wearing all white. So when the camera increases the shutter speed, your picture basically turns out underexposed. Okay? Or if you are photographing, let's say, something that's really dark, and I'll show you in the picture. You'll see an example. Could be a groom in all black suit with his buddies. Camera's thinking, oh, that's too dark, and camera will slow down the shutter speed to let more light in. But in reality, there's enough light. The lighting is fine, but because it sees a lot of dark and black, it slows down the shutter speed, and as a result, your picture could be overexposed because it slowed down the shutter speed and more light came in. So, to compensate for that, you can adjust your exposure compensation. Okay, and I'll show you exactly where to go to change this. Just remember one thing: when you are going to add, like when you are on a positive side of exposure compensation, the camera will decrease the shutter speed for you. So when you go +1, well, plus 0.3, 0.7, +1, +2 on your exposure compensation, the camera will basically slow down your shutter speed. Okay, and when you go on the negative side, -1, -2, the camera will increase the shutter speed. So just keep in mind there's an opposite relationship here. The more you increase on the exposure compensation side, the slower your shutter speed is going to get. So you don't want to fall below your minimum shutter speed, which I'm going to discuss in my next video. This is where you change your exposure compensation. See this plus and minus sign here? This is on your Nikon D7000. I don't know where this thing is going to be on your Canon model. Oops. Camera is in aperture. If it's in manual, this exposure compensation means nothing. Okay, so make sure it's in aperture. Alright, look at the shutter speed right here, 200th of a second, right? So if I press this button and the back dial, look what happens when I decrease the exposure compensation. The shutter speed was 200th of a second, and I went from 200 to 400th of a second. As I'm going further into negative, the shutter speed is going up. So just remember this relationship. When you decrease the exposure compensation, shutter speed increases. Alright, so let's go back to 0. 200th of a second, right? I'm going to add plus to it. From 200, it went to 100. The further I go, the slower your shutter speed gets. So here's the first example. The camera was tricked here because I was focusing on something that is very dark. And the camera is thinking, it's too dark, let me slow down my shutter speed to let more light in. There was plenty of light already, and that caused the overexposure. You cannot even see the Statue of Liberty in the back, which is between the two boots. So what I did to compensate for this, I went -1 on my exposure compensation, and that basically increased the shutter speed, and that's the picture I get. And now you can see the Statue of Liberty in the back, and it's much better than it's properly exposed, basically. All right. So in this picture, you could see it's dark. It's actually not even a good picture. I took it just to give you guys an example. I was shooting an event the other day. So in this, you can't really tell, but the chandelier was really it had a nice punch to it, you know, with all the lights on and everything. And I focused on the chandelier, a lot of light bouncing there as well. And the camera was tricked again. Camera's thinking there's a lot of light, and to compensate for that, camera increased the shutter speed to let less light in. The light was okay, and as a result, the picture was underexposed. So to compensate for that, all you have to do is go on the plus side of your exposure compensation. So I went up +1, and this is the picture I get. So I honestly don't know if this is properly exposed or not, because in manual you have just way more control. But this is just to give you an example how you can adjust your exposure when you are shooting in Aperture. So that's pretty much it for today.